I never thought a simple trip to the babysitter would turn into one of the most stressful and heartbreaking experiences of my life. I had left my toddler with someone I trusted, thinking it would be a few hours of peace while I ran errands. But when I came back, my child was gone. And not just gone. Taken by someone I thought I knew, someone I never imagined would cross such a line. My ex's mom. It started innocently enough. I had been trying to keep things civil with my ex for the sake of our child, and his mom, my child's grandmother, had always seemed nice on the surface. But over time, little things started to bother me. She would show up unannounced, asking questions about my parenting, making comments about how I was too strict or not doing things right. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe she just wanted to help. But I had no idea how far she was willing to go. The first time she took my toddler without my permission, I thought it was a misunderstanding. She called me later, all smiles, saying, "I just wanted to spend some time with the baby. You know, as a grandma." I was furious, but I tried to stay calm. I reminded her firmly that she needed to ask before taking my child anywhere. I thought that would set boundaries, but I quickly learned boundaries weren't going to work here. It escalated fast. She began showing up at the babysitter's house, insisting she had grandparent rights and could take my toddler whenever she wanted. I had never heard of such a thing, and honestly, I was scared. Every time I tried to enforce my parental rights, she would argue, shout, and sometimes even threaten to call authorities. The tension started to affect my toddler, who didn't understand why Grandma kept taking them away and why I was always so upset. I remember one afternoon clearly, my toddler was playing with blocks, laughing, completely unaware of the chaos around them. The babysitter looked at me nervously as the door opened, and there she was, my ex's mom, striding in like she owned the place. "I'm taking the baby," she said casually, as if she hadn't been repeatedly told she couldn't do this. My heart raced. I tried to reason with her, but she refused to listen. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a visit. This was about control, and I had no idea how far she would go. I started documenting everything, texts, calls, even videos whenever she showed up uninvited. I needed proof because I knew it might come to legal action, but I never thought it would reach the level it did. My ex tried to stay out of it, at least at first, saying, "Mom just wants to see the baby." But every time she did this, he seemed powerless to stop her. I felt like I was fighting a battle alone, trying to protect my child from someone who should have been a loving family member, not a source of fear and stress. The situation hit a breaking point one morning. I had arranged for the babysitter to watch my toddler while I went to a doctor's appointment. Everything was scheduled and planned, and I felt a small sense of relief knowing my child would be safe. But when I arrived back, the babysitter was panicked. "She's gone," she said, her voice trembling. "Your ex's mom just showed up and took them." My heart stopped. I asked for details, trying to stay calm, but all I could think about was my toddler, completely oblivious, taken from the safe place they had been in for hours. I immediately called my ex. His excuse was the same as always. "Mom just wanted some time with the baby." But I couldn't stay calm this time. This was not a simple misunderstanding. This was repeated, deliberate behavior that was putting my child at risk. I could feel my hands shaking as I made another call, this time to the authorities, trying to understand what my options were. Could she really claim some kind of grandparent rights? I had no idea, and the fear of losing control over my own child was overwhelming. I remember pacing my living room that day, thinking about all the people who would tell me to stay calm, to let families spend time together. But this wasn't family time, it was theft. It was intimidation. It was making me feel powerless in the one area of life where I should have the most control, my child's safety. I started realizing that I couldn't just rely on polite conversations or boundaries anymore. This was bigger than me. Soon, the calls to Child Protective Services became a lifeline. I explained everything, the repeated incidents, the threats, the stress on my toddler. I could hear the concern in the worker's voice as they asked detailed questions, trying to figure out the situation. I had always imagined CPS involvement as a last resort, something scary and complicated, but in that moment, I realized I had no choice. I needed someone on my side who could make sure my toddler was safe and that this pattern didn't continue. Even after CPS got involved, the tension didn't disappear. Every phone call, every text, every unexpected knock at the door kept me on edge. My toddler, too young to understand the chaos, seemed confused by the constant changes, the sudden disappearances, and the way my stress made me act differently. It broke my heart to see the fear in their little eyes, even when they didn't know why it was there. I wanted to scream, to protect them, but all I could do was hold them tight and hope the system would work as it was supposed to. And then, just when I thought I might catch a break, something happened that I couldn't have predicted, a twist that changed everything about this nightmare. I won't reveal it just yet, because it's important you understand the full scope of the situation first. But what I can say is that the involvement of CPS opened a door that neither my ex nor his mom expected. It brought new rules, new scrutiny, and a legal perspective that finally put my rights and my toddler's safety front and center. I can still remember the look on my toddler's face that night, sleepy and confused, not knowing why their world seemed to shift so suddenly. And as I sat there, exhausted and anxious, I realized this story was far from over. What started as small annoyances and boundary issues had escalated into something much more serious, something that would test me in ways I never imagined. I want you to stay with me, because this is not just a story about a difficult family dynamic. It's about parental rights, safety, and the lengths someone might go when they think they can manipulate the system. It's about what happens when love, trust, and family boundaries collide in ways no parent ever expects. And it's about what I had to do to make sure my toddler could feel safe again in their own world. By the end of this story, you'll see how far people can push when they think rules don't apply to them, how bureaucracy and legal systems can become allies or obstacles, and why standing up for your child sometimes means facing people you never thought could hurt them. But right now, as I share this part of my journey, I'm still in the middle of it. I'm still navigating the fear, the uncertainty, and the sheer emotional roller coaster that comes with having someone repeatedly take your child under the guise of grandparent rights. So stay tuned, because in the next part, I'll explain what happened after CPS got involved, how my ex's mom reacted, and what shocking discovery changed everything. This is a story every parent needs to hear, and it's one that left me questioning who I could really trust and what lengths I would go to protect the most important person in my life, my toddler. After CPS got involved, everything felt both heavier and strangely hopeful at the same time. The worker assigned to my case was kind but firm, asking questions I hadn't even thought about before. They wanted to know about every interaction I'd had with my ex's mom, every incident at the babysitter's, every time my toddler had been taken without permission. It was exhausting to recall it all, but I realized that each detail painted a bigger picture of what was really happening, something that wasn't just about family disagreements, but about control, fear, and my child's safety. I started to remember the little signs I had ignored in the past. How she always seemed to know exactly where I would be and when. How she insisted on buying the baby things I didn't ask for, but always just in case she needed them. How she would linger during drop-offs and pickups, her gaze sharp, always measuring, always watching. At the time, I had written it off as harmless grandmotherly concern. Now, with everything happening, I realized those small moments were part of a pattern I hadn't fully recognized. My ex, meanwhile, was stuck in the middle. He wanted peace and to avoid confrontation, but he didn't seem to understand how dangerous this had become. Sometimes he would defend his mom, saying things like, "She just loves the baby. She's a grandma. You're overreacting." But I knew better. Love doesn't mean taking someone else's child without permission, and it doesn't mean making a parent feel powerless in their own home. I could see the guilt in his eyes, the frustration that he couldn't or wouldn't stop her. It made the situation even more tense because I didn't know who I could rely on. I spent nights thinking about all the possibilities, wondering if there was some legal loophole she was trying to exploit. Could grandparents actually claim rights to a child without the parent's consent? I had read bits online, but nothing made me feel safe. The idea that someone could show up at a babysitter's house and demand a toddler was terrifying. I had to learn the rules fast. I started digging into laws, talking to friends who had legal experience, and even reaching out to other parents online who had faced similar situations. The more I learned, the more I realized that CPS was my strongest ally, but even they could only do so much. Meanwhile, my toddler's world had been turned upside down. They started asking questions I didn't know how to answer. Where's Grandma? Or why did she take me? Their innocence made everything harder. I wanted to protect them from the stress and confusion, but I also couldn't hide the reality. Every interaction with the babysitter became tense. She was supportive, but even she admitted she was nervous every time my ex's mom showed up, never knowing what would happen next. I could see how everyone around my child was on edge, and it made me angry that this chaos had been forced upon us. One day, while CPS was reviewing the case, I decided to confront my own feelings. I had been so focused on my ex's mom and what she was doing that I hadn't fully thought about how it was affecting me. The fear, the anxiety, the sleepless nights, they were taking a toll. I realized I had been operating in survival mode, constantly waiting for the next incident, rather than thinking strategically about how to protect my toddler long-term. Writing everything down, documenting each interaction, and sharing it with CPS helped, but it also reminded me how serious this situation had become. My ex's mom, meanwhile, wasn't slowing down. Even knowing CPS was involved, she started showing up in ways that were harder to ignore. One morning, she appeared at my doorstep with a big smile, holding a stuffed animal, acting as if nothing had happened. "I just wanted to see the baby," she said sweetly. But I could feel the tension in the air. Her calmness was unnerving, almost predatory. She was testing me, seeing what she could get away with. I didn't answer, just called CPS to report it immediately. I could feel my hands shaking as I hung up the phone. I was exhausted, but I couldn't let her win. I began noticing how her actions weren't random. They were calculated. She would send texts to my ex at odd hours, asking for updates, trying to catch me off guard. She would show up at parks or daycare centers, always finding ways to be near my toddler. I realized that this wasn't just about visiting. It was about control, about creating doubt and fear in my mind. And worst of all, I could see how much it affected my child. They were starting to sense the tension, the arguments, and the unpredictability of their environment. I knew I had to act, but every step forward felt like a gamble. CPS started recommending steps to protect both me and my toddler. They suggested specific pickup procedures at the babysitters, supervised visits if necessary, and clear documentation of every interaction. I followed each instruction carefully, hoping it would finally put some boundaries in place. But even as I took these steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. There was a pattern to her behavior, something that suggested she wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted, or until someone forced her to. At the same time, I had to navigate my own emotions. Anger, frustration, fear, they all collided inside me. I had always thought of myself as a patient person, but this situation tested me in ways I never imagined. I started talking to friends and family about it, trying to process everything. Some were supportive, some didn't fully understand, but I realized I needed allies who could help me stay grounded and focused. My toddler's safety depended on my ability to stay calm, even when my world felt chaotic. Then came the moment that made me realize this was no longer just about boundaries or legal rules. It was about proving that I could protect my child no matter what. My ex's mom made a move that was more aggressive than anything before. She tried to arrange a visit through the babysitter without my knowledge, and I caught wind of it just in time. My heart raced, my palms sweated, and I knew I had to act fast. I immediately contacted CPS again, explaining the situation in detail. They assured me that steps would be taken, but I could tell from their tone that this was becoming a pattern that worried even them. I couldn't stop thinking about how my toddler would feel if she succeeded. The thought of someone else deciding where my child could be, how long they could stay away, and who they could trust made me feel helpless in a way I had never felt before. Every parent wants to feel like they are in control of their child's world, but in that moment, I realized how fragile that control could be when someone else refused to respect boundaries. And yet, through all the fear and uncertainty, I also began noticing little things that reminded me of hope. The babysitter's support, CPS's involvement, and even my ex showing small signs of understanding what was happening, All of it reminded me that I wasn't entirely alone. I started to feel a tiny spark of confidence that, with persistence and careful action, I could protect my toddler and finally establish a safe environment. But even with that hope, the tension never went away. Every phone ring, every knock at the door, every unexpected message from my ex's mom sent my heart racing. I knew that the real test hadn't even begun. The battle wasn't just about stopping her from taking my child. It was about proving that parental rights and safety were not negotiable, even against someone who claimed grandparent rights. And I knew that until she truly understood that, this story was far from over. As I watched my toddler sleep that night, I held them close and whispered promises I hoped I could keep. Promises that no one would take them without consent, promises that they would be safe, and promises that I would fight every step of the way. I didn't know how the next chapter would unfold, but I knew it was coming, and I knew it would test me in ways I couldn't yet imagine. This story isn't just about my struggle. It's about boundaries, about parental rights, and about what can happen when someone refuses to respect them. It's about fear, strategy, and the determination to protect the most important person in your life. And even now, as I share these events, the tension is still there. The uncertainty, the threats, the constant worry, it's all still real. What happens next is something I never saw coming, something that changed the way I looked at family, trust, and safety forever. But before we get to that, you need to understand everything that led to it. The fear, the manipulation, the repeated breaches of trust. Only then can you see how a simple visit to the babysitter turned into a nightmare that no parent should ever have to face. After the repeated incidents, it felt like every day brought a new challenge. I started noticing patterns in my ex's mom's behavior that I hadn't before, subtle things that hinted she was trying to manipulate not just me, but the entire situation. She would send long texts to my ex, full of guilt and emotion, painting herself as the victim. "I just want to spend time with my grandchild," she would write. "Why is everyone against me?" It was manipulative, and it put my ex in a tough spot. He often didn't know whether to defend me or to protect his mom, and every time he hesitated, I felt my frustration grow. The babysitter became an unexpected ally. She started giving me detailed updates about what happened when my toddler was in her care, reporting not only incidents with my ex's mom but also subtle changes in my child's behavior. My toddler seemed more anxious, clingy, and sometimes even reluctant to leave the babysitter when it was time to go home. I knew it was because of all the back and forth, the sudden appearances, and the tension that hung in the air. I felt helpless, wishing I could explain things to my toddler, even though they were too young to understand. Meanwhile, CPS began taking the case seriously. They asked for every piece of evidence I had collected, screenshots of texts, videos, timestamps, and even witness statements from the babysitter. I realized that the more organized I was, the more weight my case would carry, but it was emotionally exhausting to relive everything each time. Every incident felt like it happened yesterday, and every retelling reminded me how vulnerable my toddler had been in those moments. One angle I hadn't fully considered before was the perspective of my ex. He was caught between his mother and me, and I could see the strain it put on him. Sometimes he would express guilt for not stopping his mom, even though I knew he wasn't fully responsible. Other times, he seemed frustrated with me, as if I was overreacting. But deep down, I could see that he was scared too. Scared of the conflict, scared of losing access to his child, and scared of the legal implications of this growing dispute. I wanted to reach him, to make him understand the danger of what was happening, but communication had become so strained that even simple conversations felt like walking through a minefield. The legal aspect became a secondary stress that I hadn't anticipated. I started researching cases online about grandparent visitation rights and realized that in some states, grandparents could petition for visitation, but it was never meant to allow them to take a child without parental consent. That knowledge made me feel slightly more secure, but also more aware that my ex's mom was clever enough to push boundaries and create confusion. She wasn't just acting out of love. She was strategically testing limits, finding loopholes, and hoping no one would challenge her. There were moments when I questioned my own judgment. Friends would say things like, "Maybe she's just trying to help," or grandparents should be allowed to spend time. But I knew the difference between occasional visits and taking a child repeatedly without permission. I knew the difference between love and control. Still, it was exhausting to constantly justify my decisions to others while trying to protect my toddler. The conflict also brought up a lot of emotions I hadn't anticipated: fear, anger, guilt, and sadness all tangled together. I began journaling to process everything, writing down not just what happened but how I felt. Sometimes the emotions were overwhelming, and I found myself crying late at night, wondering if my efforts were enough to keep my child safe. At the same time, I tried to stay strong, reminding myself that my toddler depended on me for stability, calm, and security. One subplot that developed during this time was the relationship with the babysitter. What started as a professional arrangement grew into a kind of partnership. She became someone I could rely on not just for childcare, but for honest insight. She would tell me when she noticed changes in my toddler or when she observed my ex's mom acting manipulative. Her observations became invaluable, but they also added another layer of tension. Every report reminded me that this wasn't a simple family disagreement. It was a pattern of behavior that could affect my toddler's emotional well-being. The school of thought I started adopting was simple but firm: documentation and consistency. I began creating logs of every interaction, every call, every text. I kept records of every time my toddler was taken or approached by my ex's mom. I knew it sounded obsessive, but the reality was that these records could be the difference between safety and further manipulation. It was exhausting but necessary. Every night, I would go over the day's events, making notes and planning the next steps. I was determined not to give her an inch, because I knew that once she sensed hesitation, she would exploit it. Then came the emotional manipulation on another level. My ex's mom started leaving small gifts, writing notes, and even sending photos to my ex, designed to appeal to nostalgia and sentimentality. She was trying to create doubt, make him question if I was being too harsh, too controlling. And at first, it worked a little. I could see him hesitating, thinking maybe he should intervene. But I reminded him gently that this was about safety and boundaries, not emotions. The emotional tug-of-war became exhausting because it wasn't just my child's safety at stake. It was my sanity too. One evening, things took an even more disturbing turn. I got a call from the babysitter while I was at work. My ex's mom had shown up at the house unannounced again. The babysitter tried to keep her calm, but she refused to leave, insisting that she had rights and claiming that I was keeping my own child from family. I could hear my toddler crying in the background. I felt my chest tighten. I had already reported her multiple times to CPS, and yet, she was still testing boundaries. It was clear she wasn't going to stop until someone firmly intervened. Through all of this, I started noticing small cracks in my ex's mom's strategy. She was clever, but she was also impatient and emotionally driven. Her insistence on taking the child without asking, her attempts at manipulation, and her inability to respect boundaries were all signs that she thought rules didn't apply to her. CPS recognized this pattern as well. They began talking about formal measures, official restrictions, supervised visits, and legal documentation to create a safer structure. But even with these measures, the tension remained. Every moment felt like walking on thin ice. My toddler's reactions became more pronounced too. They started showing signs of stress, clinging to me more than usual, waking up in the middle of the night, and sometimes acting out during playtime. It broke my heart to see the confusion in their eyes. I tried to explain gently, in age-appropriate ways, that some people didn't follow rules and that I was there to protect them. But I knew they were too young to fully understand, which made every incident more painful for both of us. In the midst of all this, I also had to navigate my own doubts and fears. I questioned whether I was overreacting, whether I was being too strict, whether my ex's mom might somehow be right. But deep down, I knew the truth. Love doesn't give someone the right to take a child without permission. And no amount of charm or manipulation could make that okay. The battle had become about more than visits. It had become about safety, control, and establishing boundaries that actually meant something. Even now, the story is far from over. The tension is still high, The threats and manipulations continue, and every day brings a new challenge. I can't predict what my ex's mom will do next, and that uncertainty is one of the hardest parts. The only thing I know for sure is that I have to stay vigilant, protect my toddler, and keep building the case that proves boundaries and safety are not negotiable. And as I watch my toddler sleep at night, I realize that the real battle isn't just legal. It's emotional, psychological, and deeply personal. It's about teaching my child that home is safe, that boundaries matter, and that even when people try to manipulate or control, there are people who will fight to protect them. The conflict is still unfolding, and the next move could come at any time. I just have to be ready. The calm that followed felt uneasy, like the quiet right before a storm. Even though things on the surface looked stable, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't finished yet. Every time my phone buzzed, my chest tightened. Every unfamiliar car slowing near the babysitter's house made my heart race. I had learned the hard way that silence didn't always mean peace. Sometimes it meant someone was planning their next move. CPS was still reviewing everything, and while they hadn't made any final decisions yet, the questions they asked grew more detailed and more serious. They wanted timelines, exact words used in conversations, and explanations of how my toddler reacted after each incident. I could tell this was heading toward something bigger. The caseworker's tone had shifted from concern to urgency, and that alone told me the situation was nearing a breaking point. My ex's mom, on the other hand, became strangely polite. She stopped sending long emotional messages and instead kept things short and formal. That change worried me more than the anger ever had. It felt calculated, like she'd realized that emotional outbursts weren't working anymore. When people like her go quiet, it's usually because they think they've found a better strategy. The babysitter noticed it too. She told me my ex's mom had called once, asking oddly specific questions about schedules and routines. She didn't demand anything. She didn't raise her voice. She just asked, listened, and hung up. That conversation stayed with me all night. I kept replaying it in my head, wondering what information she was trying to gather and why now. My toddler picked up on the tension even when I tried to hide it. They became more clingy, asking to be held longer than usual and following me from room to room. At bedtime, they asked questions that broke my heart. Are you coming back? Will someone take me? I reassured them the best I could, but inside, I was scared too. I knew something was building, and I didn't know when it would hit. My ex started acting differently as well. He began asking more questions than usual, pressing for updates about CPS and hinting that his mom felt misunderstood. He wasn't offending her outright, but he wasn't fully on my side either. It felt like he was being pulled again, and that tug-of-war put me on edge. I needed him grounded, not wavering, especially now. Then came the message that made everything feel real. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't emotional. It was just one sentence from my ex's mom. I've spoken to someone who says this doesn't have to go the way you think. I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to understand what she meant. Someone who said what? A lawyer? A mediator? Or someone else entirely? The vagueness made it worse. I forwarded the message to CPS immediately. The caseworker didn't panic, but their response was careful. They said this kind of language often appears when people believe they've found leverage. That word, leverage, echoed in my head. What leverage could she possibly have? I had documentation, witnesses, records. Still, doubt crept in, and that's exactly what she wanted. Around that same time, the babysitter told me something else that unsettled me deeply. A woman had stopped by earlier in the week, asking questions about childcare availability. She claimed to be a family friend. The babysitter didn't give details, but the timing felt too perfect to be coincidence. It felt like my ex's mom was circling again, just more quietly this time. Sleep became harder. I lay awake imagining scenarios, rehearsing conversations, planning responses to things that hadn't happened yet. I reminded myself to stay calm, to stick to facts, to trust the process. But when your child is involved, logic doesn't always silence fear. Every instinct I had was telling me we were close to something big. CPS scheduled another meeting, this time with more people involved. They didn't say exactly who would be there, only that it was important and time-sensitive. That alone told me the situation had reached a new level. I packed my folder thicker than ever, triple-checking every document, every screenshot, every note. I wasn't walking into this unprepared. The night before the meeting, my ex called unexpectedly. His voice sounded strained. He said his mom was very confident about the outcome and that she believed things were about to change. When I asked him what that meant, he didn't answer directly. That silence was louder than any argument we'd ever had. I hugged my toddler a little tighter that night, watching them sleep peacefully, unaware of the tension surrounding them. That innocence fueled my determination. Whatever was coming, I knew I couldn't back down now. Too much had happened. Too many lines had been crossed. As the meeting approached, the weight of everything settled in my chest. The unanswered questions, the subtle threats, the shifting behavior. All signs pointed to a confrontation that would finally bring everything to a head. I didn't know exactly how it would unfold or who would reveal what, but I knew one thing for certain. The next step would change everything. And as I walked into that moment, heart pounding and hands steady, I could feel it. The story wasn't ready to resolve yet. It was about to explode into its most intense chapter, and there was no turning back. Just when I thought the tension couldn't get any worse, something happened that completely changed the game. I had been cautiously optimistic, thinking that with CPS involved and all my documentation in order, my ex's mom might finally realize she couldn't just take my toddler whenever she pleased. But that night, I got a call that made my heart stop. The babysitter sounded frantic, her voice shaking. "She's here, and she brought someone with her." I froze. Brought someone with her? My mind raced through possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Asked for details, trying to keep my voice calm. The babysitter explained that my ex's mom had shown up at the door not alone, but with another woman, someone I had never met, who seemed just as determined to take my toddler. They were both insisting in unison that they had the right to see my child. I could hear the panic in my toddler's voice in the background, and it was like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the audacity of showing up together. It was the implication that my ex's mom was escalating. She wasn't just testing boundaries anymore. She was mobilizing support, trying to intimidate me into giving up control. I felt a surge of anger, but also fear. This wasn't a small, emotional outburst. This was calculated, and it was designed to pressure me. I immediately called CPS again, but I could feel the minutes stretching into eternity as I waited for guidance. While I was on the phone, I noticed something else that made my stomach twist. My toddler, usually confident and playful, was clinging to the babysitter, crying and asking for me. I could hear the confusion in their little voice, the fear that I was never going to come back for them. It broke me to realize how deeply this situation was affecting my child, and it reminded me that this conflict wasn't just about legal boundaries, it was about emotional safety, trust, and stability. As CPS advised the babysitter to keep the door locked and wait for officers, I tried to piece together how it had escalated so fast. My ex's mom had been relentless for weeks, showing up, manipulating texts, testing limits. But bringing someone else into it? That was new. That was dangerous. And I knew it was meant to intimidate me, to make me doubt my own authority as a parent. I could feel the weight of every previous incident pressing down on me as I tried to stay calm. Then came another shock. Later that evening, I found out from a neighbor that my ex's mom had been talking to other parents in the neighborhood, spreading stories about me. Stories that made it seem like I was restricting family access unfairly. She was building an army of support, trying to isolate me socially and maybe even legally. The thought that people I didn't know could now be involved made my chest tighten. This wasn't just a personal conflict anymore. It was becoming public, and I had no idea who might believe her version of events. I realized that this escalation was about more than control, it was about influence. My ex's mom wasn't just trying to see my child. She was trying to control the narrative, to make it seem like I was the unreasonable one. It was manipulative in a way that made me second-guess every action, even though I knew I was acting in my toddler's best interest. The tension was suffocating. Every decision now carried weight, because even the smallest misstep could be twisted against me. At the same time, I noticed a subtle change in my ex. He was no longer just caught in the middle, he was quietly panicking too. I could see it in the way he avoided answering texts promptly, the way he hesitated when I asked for clarification about his mom's involvement, and even the way he flinched whenever I mentioned boundaries. I wanted him to understand the severity of the situation, but he seemed paralyzed, unsure how to protect both his mother and his child. It made me realize that I couldn't rely on him to intervene. The responsibility and the risk was entirely on me. Meanwhile, my toddler's reactions were becoming more pronounced. They started waking up in the middle of the night crying for Grandma, then looking around, confused, as if unsure whether they were safe. The babysitter noted subtle behavioral changes during playtime, small but noticeable signs of stress. I knew that this escalation was taking a real toll, not just emotionally, but psychologically. Every unplanned visit, every text, every show of force was leaving a mark, and I worried that if the pattern continued, it could have lasting effects on my child. I began strategizing more aggressively. I set stricter pickup procedures with a babysitter, ensuring that no one could take my toddler without my explicit permission. I documented everything, including conversations with neighbors who witnessed my ex's mom's behavior. I even considered security measures, cameras, locks, controlled entry, but I felt trapped between keeping my child safe and not escalating things further. It was a delicate balance, and the fear that one wrong move could make things worse hung over me constantly. Then, just when I thought I had prepared for every possibility, another twist came. I discovered that my ex's mom had contacted a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but someone claiming to specialize in grandparent rights. The moment I heard this, a cold shiver ran down my spine. She wasn't just relying on manipulation and intimidation anymore. She was exploring legal avenues to assert authority over my child. I knew it could take months or even years, but the mere threat of legal action changed everything. Every decision I made, every interaction, every call to CPS now had a new layer of urgency. At the same time, I started noticing something strange about my ex's mom's new companion, the woman who had arrived with her at the babysitter's house. She seemed unusually calm, almost rehearsed, as if she had been trained or instructed on how to act. Her presence added a new level of pressure, as if my ex's mom had recruited a strategist to push the limits further. The thought of facing not just my ex's mom, but someone else equally determined made me realize the stakes were higher than ever. As the days passed, the pattern continued. I couldn't predict when she would appear, what excuse she would give, or who she might bring next. The constant unpredictability left me anxious, hyper-aware of every text, call, and knock on the door. Even small things, like the sound of a car pulling up, set my heart racing. My toddler, sensing the tension, became clingier, more hesitant, and sometimes even fearful of new faces. It was clear that the emotional stakes were now just as high as the legal ones. I began sharing my experience cautiously with friends I trusted, hoping for support but also feeling exposed. Every conversation was a delicate balance. I needed advice, but I couldn't let information spread to anyone who might side with my ex's mom. The pressure of managing both the safety of my toddler and the social narrative around me was almost unbearable. I realized that this escalation wasn't just external, it was infiltrating every part of my life. And then, in a moment I wasn't expecting, I got a call from CPS that changed the trajectory even further. They had received additional reports from a neighbor corroborating some of my claims, but there were also questions I hadn't anticipated, questions that suggested my ex's mom was preparing a strategy that could complicate matters legally and emotionally. I realized I was no longer just defending my toddler from repeated boundary violations. I was entering a conflict that could ripple far beyond what I had imagined. The stakes had never been higher. Every day felt like a countdown to the next move, the next attempt to manipulate, intimidate, or challenge me. My toddler's safety, my sanity, and my authority as a parent were all on the line. And just when I thought I had reached the peak of tension, I knew deep down that another twist was coming. Something that could change everything, something that would force me to confront not just my ex's mom, but the entire system that allowed her to keep pushing boundaries. This was no longer just a story about visitation or family drama. It was about power, manipulation, and the fight to protect the most vulnerable person in the world, my toddler. And as I prepared for what I knew was coming next, I realized there was no turning back. The escalation had only begun, and the real challenge, the one that would test every ounce of patience, strategy, and courage I had, was still ahead. The day of the confrontation finally arrived. CPS had arranged a formal meeting at a neutral location, and I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. After weeks of uncertainty, repeated violations, and escalating manipulation, this was the moment where boundaries would be enforced. I held my toddler's hand tightly as we entered the room, noticing my ex's mom sitting across from us, calm but with that same calculating look in her eyes. She had clearly prepared herself, maybe even rehearsed what she was going to say. The caseworker began by reviewing every documented incident, each text, each unauthorized visit, and every observation from the babysitter. As they laid out the pattern of repeated boundary violations, my ex's mom tried to interject, insisting that she was only acting out of love and that grandparents have rights too. But the caseworker was firm. They emphasized that love never justifies taking a child without consent and that parental rights are paramount. I could feel a sense of relief, but also tension. This confrontation wasn't over yet. Then came my ex's turn to speak. For the first time, he acknowledged the truth, that his mom had repeatedly crossed boundaries and caused emotional distress for both my toddler and me. It was a small moment but significant. His admission helped solidify the case, and I could sense my ex's mom realizing that her influence had diminished. I tried to remain calm, focusing on my toddler, who was watching the adults with wide, curious eyes, too young to understand the full drama but aware of the tension in the room. The caseworker then laid out the formal measures. My ex's mom would no longer be allowed to take my toddler without explicit, documented permission. Visits would be supervised and arranged in advance, ensuring my toddler's safety and emotional stability. The restrictions were clear and legally binding. For the first time in weeks, I felt a cautious sense of security, knowing that the pattern of manipulation and intimidation had finally been addressed. But just as I began to feel that relief, my ex's mom did something I didn't expect. She paused, looked directly at me, and with a quiet but firm voice said, "You may have won today, but you'll see. I'll find another way." There was no yelling, no dramatic display, just a calm, chilling threat. It made my stomach drop. Even with CPS involved and formal restrictions in place, she was already thinking about her next move. I realized that while the immediate conflict had been resolved, the underlying tension wasn't gone. Then came the final twist that nobody expected. As the caseworker was finalizing the paperwork, my toddler, who had been unusually quiet, tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "I want Grandma to play." My heart sank. Despite all the chaos and emotional distress, my child still had a bond with my ex's mom, innocent and unconditional. It was a reminder that love and family connections are complicated, and that protecting my toddler didn't mean erasing relationships. It meant setting boundaries and teaching safety. The caseworker handled the moment delicately, explaining to my toddler in simple, reassuring terms that they could still love Grandma, but visits would have to be safe and respectful. I held my toddler close, feeling the weight of responsibility and the bittersweet reality that love and protection often have to coexist in complicated ways. It was a powerful reminder of why I had fought so hard and why these boundaries mattered. After the meeting, I felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. The legal conflict had been resolved, and the immediate threats were neutralized. My toddler was safe, the boundaries were clear, and CPS would continue to monitor compliance. Yet, the subtle threat from my ex's mom lingered in my mind. It was a chilling reminder that some people don't give up easily, and that vigilance is sometimes a lifelong necessity for a parent. In the following days, life slowly began to regain a sense of normalcy. My toddler's laughter returned, playtime became less tense, and I could finally feel moments of peace. The babysitter remained a crucial support, ensuring that visits went smoothly and reporting any attempts to bypass the rules. I started to realize that this experience, though incredibly difficult, had strengthened my resolve as a parent and my ability to advocate for my child. But just when I thought the story had reached its conclusion, another unexpected development arose. One evening, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Hesitant, I answered, and it was the woman who had accompanied my ex's mom to the babysitter weeks earlier. Her tone was urgent but calm. She claimed that she had information about my ex's mom, information that could explain her behavior and potentially protect my toddler even further. She refused to give details over the phone, insisting we meet in person. My mind raced. Could this be another attempt to intimidate me, or was it genuinely a way to safeguard my child? I knew I couldn't ignore it, but I also couldn't risk putting my toddler in any danger. This new twist added another layer of suspense. Even after the formal resolution, the story wasn't over. The battle for safety, clarity, and trust had taken a new turn, and it was up to me to navigate it carefully. As I prepared to meet her, I realized the journey had taught me something crucial. Protecting a child is never straightforward. It's not just about setting boundaries. It's about anticipating manipulation, understanding complex relationships, and staying vigilant even when legal measures are in place. The conflict with my ex's mom had escalated beyond what I ever imagined, but it also revealed my own resilience, my ability to advocate for my toddler, and the importance of support systems like CPS and trusted caregivers. The final twist hung over me like a shadow, reminding me that life rarely offers simple resolutions. My ex's mom had lost the immediate battle, but the story's threads were still alive, and the next chapter could bring unexpected revelations. I held my toddler close that night, feeling both relief and apprehension, knowing that this experience had changed all of us forever. Even with the legal protections, the babysitter's vigilance, and CPS's support, one thing was clear. The story wasn't truly over. The new twist hinted at secrets, strategies, or revelations that could surface at any moment. And as a parent, I realized that protecting a child often means expecting the unexpected and being ready for it, no matter how difficult the road ahead may be. In the days following the confrontation, life began to settle into a fragile kind of normal. CPS continued to monitor the situation, checking in with both the babysitter and me to ensure that the restrictions were being followed. My ex's mom, while outwardly calm, had stopped showing up unannounced. The formal boundaries, finally enforced, created a clear line that even she could not cross. It felt like a victory, but I knew better than to let my guard down completely. The tension had left a mark on all of us, and I had learned that vigilance was part of being a parent. My toddler, slowly but surely, began to feel safe again. Playtime returned to its joyful rhythm, and bedtime was no longer punctuated by tears or questions about who might appear at the door. I noticed small signs of relief, a relaxed posture, laughter without hesitation, even little conversations where they talked about their day with confidence. Seeing that change in my child was a reminder of why I had fought so hard, why every step, every phone call to CPS, every careful action mattered. Their safety and emotional well-being had been my top priority, and finally, I could see the results. The babysitter became more than just a caregiver during this ordeal. She became a partner in protecting my toddler, someone I could rely on completely. We continued to coordinate schedules, visits, and any outside interactions to make sure boundaries were respected. Her support had been invaluable, and I realized that having someone I could trust outside the immediate family was just as important as setting legal protections. Together, we created a safe, stable environment where my toddler could begin to heal from the confusion and fear that had built up over the previous weeks. Meanwhile, my ex began to shift as well. After seeing the formal measures enforced and acknowledging the truth of the repeated boundary violations, he became more cooperative. He no longer hesitated or avoided discussions about his mother. While it was not perfect, old family dynamics take time to untangle. It felt like a breakthrough. He started to understand the difference between love for a family member and respecting parental boundaries. It was a relief to see him gradually step into a supportive role, reinforcing the stability and safety we had worked so hard to achieve. Even my ex's mom, though outwardly still trying to maintain appearances, began to adjust to the restrictions. CPS made it clear that any attempt to violate the rules could have serious legal consequences. Surprisingly, over time, she started to accept the limitations, at least superficially. There were moments when I could sense a softer approach from her during supervised visits. Though still fraught with tension, there were fewer attempts at manipulation. It was a small but important shift, and it allowed me to see that even the most challenging family dynamics could change when clear boundaries and accountability were established. The woman who had accompanied my ex's mom weeks earlier never reappeared, and the threat that had loomed so heavily in the climax gradually faded. Whether she had been a temporary accomplice or simply an extension of my ex's mom's strategy, I would never know. But her absence removed an unpredictable element, which allowed me to focus fully on my toddler's recovery and rebuilding our sense of safety. The lesson was clear. Threats often appear in unexpected forms, and staying organized, calm, and proactive is essential to managing them. As the weeks passed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. This experience had been exhausting, frightening, and emotionally draining, but it had also taught me so much about resilience, boundaries, and the responsibilities of parenthood. I realized that protecting a child is never just about immediate danger. It's about anticipating manipulation, understanding complex family dynamics, and being willing to stand firm even when it's uncomfortable or unpopular. I had learned to trust my instincts, to document every interaction carefully, and to seek help from professionals when needed. I also reflected on my toddler's resilience. Despite all the stress, they had begun to process the situation in their own way, showing strength I hadn't anticipated. I understood that the emotional damage could have been lasting if I hadn't acted decisively. Their trust in me, their sense of safety, and their ability to enjoy the simple joys of childhood depended on the choices I had made during the chaos. Seeing them smile freely again felt like a victory beyond any legal ruling or confrontation. It was a reaffirmation of why I had fought every step of the way. There were still moments of tension, of course. Visits with my ex's mom were closely supervised, and I remained alert to any potential manipulation or boundary testing. But those moments were manageable, controlled, and less intimidating than before. I realized that the story wasn't about eliminating conflict entirely. It was about managing it in a way that protected my toddler while preserving their right to love family members in a safe, structured environment. That balance was delicate, but it was achievable, and that knowledge gave me a sense of peace. I also discovered unexpected support from friends, neighbors, and even other parents who had faced similar challenges. Their advice, empathy, and shared experiences helped me feel less alone. I realized that sometimes the fight isn't just about legal measures. It's also about building a network of people who can offer guidance, understanding, and reassurance. That community became a subtle but crucial part of the resolution, giving me confidence that I could navigate whatever came next. In the months that followed, my toddler thrived. The laughter returned to our home, routines became predictable and comforting, and I felt a renewed sense of control over our lives. CPS continued occasional check-ins, but the crisis had passed. What remained was the knowledge that boundaries, communication, and vigilance are the true tools of a parent. I had established safety, and that stability allowed us all to heal and grow. Yet, even as life returned to a quieter rhythm, the final twist lingered in my mind. The call from the woman who claimed to have insider information had never been fully resolved. She hadn't contacted me again, and I couldn't shake the thought that there might still be secrets I didn't know. Details about my ex's mom's plans, past manipulations, or even family dynamics I hadn't anticipated. That uncertainty reminded me that in parenting, vigilance never truly ends. Even when conflicts seem resolved, life can throw unexpected challenges your way. Reflecting on the experience, I realized that the key takeaways were clear. Parental boundaries matter, documentation is essential, and professional support, whether from CPS, legal advisors, or trusted caregivers, can make the difference between chaos and safety. I had learned to trust my instincts, to protect my child without losing perspective, and to navigate the delicate balance between love and authority. Most importantly, I understood that a child's emotional well-being comes first. Even in the face of manipulation, family pressure, or unexpected threats. Looking back, I can see how every step from documenting incidents to setting clear rules involving CPS and maintaining calm under pressure was essential in bringing resolution. My toddler's safety, their trust in me, and the stability of our home depended on these actions. It wasn't easy, and it required strength I didn't always feel I had, but the outcome was proof that determined, thoughtful, and consistent parenting can overcome even the most challenging situations. And as I hold my toddler now, watching them play freely, I feel a sense of quiet triumph. The chaos is past, the threats have been neutralized, and boundaries are respected. But the experience has left an indelible mark, a reminder that protecting a child requires vigilance, courage, and resilience. My ex's mom may have been stopped and the immediate crisis resolved, but the lessons from this story will stay with me forever. In the end, it's a story about love, determination, and the lengths a parent will go to keep their child safe. It's about understanding that boundaries aren't just rules, they're shields that protect the people who matter most. And while life will always bring unexpected challenges, knowing that you can navigate them, protect your child, and emerge stronger is the ultimate resolution. My toddler is safe, our home is stable, and the future, while unpredictable, feels manageable because we have learned how to face it together, stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever.